He was once America's golden boy, the handsome teenager with the dreamy voice who lit up television screens on the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet and climbed the charts with every song he touched. Ricky Nelson didn't just chase stardom, he was born into it. Raised in front of the camera, adored by millions, and hailed as one of the pioneers of rock and roll, he seemed destined to be remembered with fanfare. But when the news broke in 1985 that Ricky had died in a tragic plane crash on New Year's Eve, the music world stood still. What came next, however, was something no one saw coming. His funeral, expected to be a gathering of legends, loyal fans, and Hollywood elites, turned into something else entirely. A painfully quiet affair that left people wondering, where was everybody? How does someone so famous, so adored, end up with an empty farewell? The truth behind that lonely goodbye might shock you. Join us as we reveal what really happened and why almost no one showed up to Ricky Nelson's funeral. A star before he knew it. Ricky Nelson was, in every word, a successful star who seemed destined for greatness. But sadly, on December 31, 1985, his life was tragically cut short in a plane crash. And what followed after his death is something that's still talked about to this very day. At his funeral, what was meant to be a final heartfelt send-off for someone who once gave us back-to-back hits became something far more somber. The day should have been filled with love, music, and memories, but instead, it felt hauntingly empty. Because on that day, the people who had once been closest to Ricky, the ones who had shared stages, memories, and personal bonds with him, didn't show up. The pews stayed bare where familiar faces should have been. So, what really happened? Why did no one show up for Ricky Nelson's funeral? Keep watching, because the real reason will shock you. The story of Ricky Nelson is one of fame, fortune, and tragedy. Born to be a celebrity, he became the world's first teen idol and a rock and roll icon by the time he was just 17. His rise to fame was meteoric, and his fall was just as fast. Ricky Nelson was born in the limelight. On May 8, 1940, he came into the world as the second son of a well-known celebrity family. Harriet and Ozzie Nelson were already established actors and singers of remarkable talent. And they set the bar high for Ricky from the very beginning. But his early childhood wasn't all glitz and glam. Ricky was a sickly and shy child. He suffered from severe asthma and was thin and unwell in his early years. Often described as mysterious, quiet, and deeply introspective, Ricky's early demeanor didn't exactly scream future superstar. Yet somehow, the spotlight called to him. And once it did, his rise was lightning fast. It wasn't long before Ricky joined his parents' sitcom, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, where he and his older brother David played fictional versions of themselves. The show took off. First, it became a film, allowing Ricky to work alongside Hollywood hunk rock Hudson, and later it blossomed into a wildly popular television series. But even as the cameras rolled and America fell in love with Ricky, fame was already beginning to cast its shadow. Ricky's stage presence was undeniable from the start. On the set of Ozzie and Harriet, he quickly began ad-libbing and stealing the show, drawing spontaneous laughs from the studio audience. He had the energy of a miniature Jerry Lewis, but not everyone was thrilled. His father, Ozzie, couldn't stand the unpredictability. He once snapped at Ricky, "Son, there is no such thing as a child comedian." And that was just one example of how Ozzie liked to keep things under control. With the massive success of the show, Ricky found himself swimming in money at a time when most kids his age were scraping together lunch money. Both David and Ricky earned a jaw-dropping $500 a week, a sum that surpassed what the average American lawyer made at the time. But Ricky never saw that money. His father kept tight control, stashing their earnings away in a savings fund and handing out only a tiny allowance, all in the name of preventing them from becoming spoiled. On paper, it may have seemed like a wise move. In practice, It planted the seeds for a lifetime of frustration and tension for Ricky. The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet would go on to become one of the longest-running sitcoms in American history, and much of that success was due to Ricky's magnetic presence. But behind the scenes, things were beginning to unravel. He had fame, but no freedom. He had money, but no access to it. Ricky was trapped somewhere between the life of a star and the life of a regular child. The cracks were starting to show. At school, Ricky earned a reputation as a slacker and a troublemaker. In one typing class where he received a D, he spent his time throwing spitballs and mimicking voices behind the teacher's back. He flunked English because he showed up late on the rare days he bothered to attend at all. But even as his academics slipped, something else was taking root. Something that would change everything. Ricky had already proven he could act, but now music was calling. As a teenager, he picked up the guitar and the drums and discovered a real talent. He became obsessed with rock and roll, drawn especially to Elvis Presley and the movement that was shaking up the stiff expectations of the 1950s. And just like that, Ricky started to rebel. He had spent his entire life under his father's thumb. Now, there was a musical revolution happening, and Ricky was ready to join it. He traded in his clean-cut image for something edgier. His look became a statement: sideburns, slicked-back hair, and even a failed attempt at tattooing himself. For Ozzie Nelson, a man used to controlling every frame of their family's image, this must have been a nightmare. But at that point, he had bigger problems to worry about. Ricky was growing up fast, and he wasn't just changing his sound, he was stepping into the kind of fame that came with temptations of its own. Ricky Nelson's explosive love life. What else comes with fame besides the posh lifestyle and piles of cash? Admirers and romance. Ricky's teenage years were full of young love and brief romances with co-stars, fans, and other young celebrities in his age group. Ricky didn't hate the attention that his celebrity brought him, and he started very early. While working on the set of Ozzie and Harriet, a teenaged Ricky fell head over heels for the actress playing his TV girlfriend, Marianne Gaba. It was, by all accounts, brief, and they were apparently too young to enter a serious relationship. What they did get up to, though, was steamy. Ricky once confessed that they would neck for hours. The parade of girls wouldn't stop at Marianne, but this is where Ricky's troubles really started. Ricky's parents expected nothing less than perfection from their son, and they were determined to make him the next superstar. So when a steady stream of would-be girlfriends came into Ricky's life, the Nelsons were quick to put their feet down. They thought girls would only distract him from his career, not to mention that none of them were good enough for their boy. If they had it their way, Ricky wouldn't date. But little did they know that it was a girl who kick-started his career as a musician. One day, Ricky was out on a date with a girl who, like him, was also a massive fan of Elvis Presley. It was then that Ricky made a fateful decision. Despite the fact that he had no record contract to speak of, Ricky boasted to the girl, trying to impress her, that he was going to make a record just like their hero Elvis. But before he could even start, a horrific accident almost took it all away. When he was 16, Ricky's parents bought him a Porsche as a gift. Apparently, Ozzie had relaxed his no-spoilt kids rule. The cars were so exclusive in the 1950s that no dealers even existed in California. Instead, they had to be custom-built and then shipped 6 months after ordering. But Ricky was about to prove why maybe 16-year-olds shouldn't get nice things. A couple of months into his ownership of the Porsche, Ricky and his friend Forrest Stewart took it for a spin to a theater to see the rock and roll movie The Girl Can't Help It, starring the bodacious Jane Mansfield. After showing off the Porsche to some girls, the pair started to drive down Sunset Boulevard. But this is where it all went so wrong. While on Sunset Boulevard, Ricky approached a straightaway and decided to see what his Porsche could really do. despite the fact that he and his friend Stuart hadn't bothered to put on seatbelts. Soon, Ricky was going 120 miles an hour down the road, with Stuart begging him to slow down. But the moment the plea escaped his lips, disaster struck. As the pair careened down the street, the car reached a section of road where a sprinkler system had flooded the pavement. Panicked, Ricky slammed on the brakes, first spinning the car and then making it roll a breathless 8 or 9 times, ripping the tires off the car in the process. And when it finally came to a halt, everything was not okay. Although Forrest Stewart felt miraculously unharmed, he looked over to Ricky and watched a horror show. The star was screaming about his leg, and when ambulances arrived on the scene, they immediately took the pair to the hospital. As it turned out, they had both suffered cracked pelvises in the massive crash and were lucky to be alive. No one knew it at the time, but this was tragic foreshadowing. Ricky Nelson's music career. Ricky's father, Ozzie, might have been annoyed at his son's rebellion and terrified at his subsequent crash. But he also knew Ricky had a future in music, and he knew a moneymaker when he saw one. He threw himself completely behind Ricky's burgeoning singing career, despite Ricky's protestations of interference. Still, given what came next, no one could say it didn't pay off. With his industry connections, Ozzie eventually set Ricky up with Verve Records, who were looking for a young person with a pre-existing fan base and passable singing talent. After Ozzie and Harriet, Ricky thought he had both. They signed him up to record 3 songs, including I'm Walkin', but it started to go wrong almost immediately. Given Ricky's obsession with rock and roll, his entertainment roots, and his ambition to become a singer, Verve Records had some hope that their new star had a set of pipes. They were sorely disappointed. Although Ricky had some raw talent, his recordings would often go off the rails if the songs required too much breath control, had a wide range of notes, or simply contained certain words Ricky had trouble singing. As one executive put it, he was not a very accomplished singer. There wasn't even much voice. In the end, though, this hardly mattered because his father, Ozzie, had another brilliant idea. By March 1957, Rick Nelson's first professional recordings, such as they were up and ready to go. Then came one of the smartest marketing plans of the 1950s. Ever the impresario, Ozzie decided to air Ricky's first live performance on the family TV show Ozzie and Harriet, ahead of the release of I'm Walkin' as a single. It was not an immediate success. In truth, there was nothing live about Ricky's performance at all, as the young actor lip-synced all of his lines from I'm Walkin'. But more than that, to anyone who knew him, it was an extremely awkward showing. According to Ricky's brother David, this was a very embarrassed version of the song because Ricky did not know quite what to do with himself. When Ricky finally got through the piece, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. They likely hoped the performance wouldn't damage his career too much. Absolutely no one predicted its true impact. Just after this episode aired, Ricky started hustling, doing an unpaid performance of Blue Moon of Kentucky at a local high school assembly. It was typical early career grunt work, which is what made the next development so stunning. A mob of teenage girls, having apparently caught and approved of the latest Ozzie and Harriet installment, greeted him at the assembly with screams, cries, and gasps. If it wasn't clear to him then what was going on, it soon would be. As it turned out, Ricky Nelson had become almost literally an overnight sensation. Ozzie and Harriet had an audience of millions, and the fan mail soon came through in a steady avalanche, all while the phone never stopped ringing. More groups of adoring teen girls would gather at the studio gate just to catch a glimpse of Ricky. And it was just the beginning. It is hard to overstate the mania around Ricky Nelson at the time. Not only did I'm Walkin' and A Teenage Romance rocket to near the top of the charts, but the child actor's success also coined a new term. The phrase teen idol was invented specifically to describe Ricky Nelson. yet complications were on the way. Despite the mobs of adoring fans that followed him wherever he went, Ricky had eyes for only one girl, fellow singer Lori Collins. This was actually a little dicey, considering Ricky was nearly 18 years old at the time, while Collins was just 15 years old. But that didn't mean she couldn't hold her own against him. In fact, she changed his life. Despite Collins's young age, she too had been through the entertainment ringer already, having starred alongside her brother as the Collins Kids since she was a child. Of course, this gave her common ground with Ricky, but it also gave her huge connections and seasoned skills that quickly proved very useful to him. In between introducing Ricky to country heavyweights like Johnny Cash and Tex Ritter, Collins also helped co-write his first song, My Gal. Unfortunately, they were doomed from the start. Ricky Nelson knew a good thing when he saw it, and he fell madly in love with Lori Collins before long. The two teens were so devoted, they even began talking about marriage with each other, which is right about when Ricky's mother, Harriet, still terrified of her son straying from his path to stardom, stuck her nose in yet again and shut that kind of talk right down. And to be fair, Ricky was about to achieve an enormous career milestone. In October 1957, Ricky officially released his first album, aptly named Ricky. The following months were unbelievable. It reached #1 on the charts before the end of the year, but that wasn't even the best part. For a brief shining moment, Ricky even surpassed his idol Elvis. Between 1958 and 1959, Ricky had 12 hits on the charts. Elvis only had 11. Ricky Nelson was flying high, and with fame came terrifying pitfalls. While the masses of fans, fan clubs, and fan mail must have been a massive ego boost for Ricky at first, all this adulation quickly turned sour. At one event, 6 girls mobbed Ricky, threw themselves under his car, and then begged him to run them over. Strange. Yet Ricky's fame was about to get an even bigger boost, starring alongside Hollywood legends. With Ricky Nelson fever sweeping the nation, Hollywood wasted no time in casting him in a big-budget Western. He starred alongside Dean Martin and the ever-typecast cowboy John Wayne in Rio Bravo, and the film turned out to be a massive hit. A lot of that success had to do with Ricky's undeniable star power. Director Howard Hawks made sure to give him several singing scenes in the movie, capitalizing on the teen heartthrob appeal that had fans swooning. Hopefully, Ricky enjoyed every moment of that spotlight because it would turn out to be the peak of his career. A downfall was looming. By the early 1960s, a new sound began sweeping through America, and it came from across the Atlantic. The British invasion was in full force, and leading the charge were 4 mop-haired boys from Liverpool who called themselves the Beatles. Even Elvis struggled to compete with the Beatlemania that gripped the youth. And Ricky? The golden boy who once seemed untouchable began to fade fast. In a bid to keep his star burning, Ricky devised a desperate plan. To Ricky Nelson, a name wasn't just a label, it was his brand. And if that brand was too clean-cut and teeny-bopper for a changing world, then maybe it was time to reinvent it. On his 21st birthday, he made a bold move. He changed his professional name from Ricky Nelson to Rick Nelson, hoping to shed the teenage idol image that had made him famous but now threatened to make him obsolete. The rebrand was meant to show maturity and depth. Unfortunately, the world didn't buy it. The name change landed with a thud. Rick Nelson never came close to reaching the heights Ricky had once scaled. And just as his professional identity began to crack, his personal life followed suit. It was during this uncertain chapter of his life that Ricky met a young woman named Chris Harmon. She wasn't just another pretty face. Her mother was a model and actress, and her father was a football legend. On paper, it looked like the perfect union. But what made this relationship even more striking was the fact that Chris was already familiar with the Nelson family. She had long been a family friend, and for once, Ricky's notoriously hard-to-please parents actually approved of the girl he was dating. But that wasn't the only thing the couple had going for them. Ricky and Chris had striking similarities. Both were shy and introverted behind the scenes, despite growing up in the glare of the spotlight. Both had dealt with the weight of expectation, being raised by parents who were intense, demanding, and deeply involved in their children's lives. Chris came from a devout Catholic household where discipline was strict and judgment was constant. It's no wonder their connection deepened quickly, maybe a little too quickly. By 1963, Chris found herself pregnant. The news sent shockwaves through their carefully controlled worlds. Her conservative parents, known for their rigid values, made it clear there was no option but marriage. And so, on April 20th of that year, Ricky and Chris wed. Ricky later described it as a shotgun wedding, one that came less from romantic intention and more from parental pressure. The picture-perfect union that fans might have imagined was anything but. From the start, it was more of a patchwork solution than a fairy tale beginning. The couple went on to have 4 children, but more mouths to feed only added to the strain of Ricky's faltering career. By the 1970s, he was desperate for a comeback and launched a tour with new material, hoping to reignite interest and build a fresh audience. Unfortunately, things went disastrously wrong. During a performance at Madison Square Garden, Ricky was greeted not with applause, but with loud boos from the crowd. The reasons behind the audience's reaction were murky. Some blamed it on unrelated police activity happening in the crowd. Others believed the audience had been disappointed with his new material, or that they came expecting his old hits. Whatever the case, Ricky felt humiliated. But from that humiliation came a spark of inspiration. The experience at Madison Square Garden stirred something inside him, and that frustration eventually gave birth to his final hit song, Garden Party. The lyrics struck a chord with fans. You can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself. It was an honest anthem, a farewell to the expectations that had followed him since his teenage years. It marked the end of his reign as America's original teen idol. And as his professional career drew to a quiet close, the chaos in his personal life reached a breaking point. Nelson's disastrous divorce. By 1975, his marriage to Chris had deteriorated significantly. The relationship had become deeply strained under the weight of Ricky's career struggles and Chris's growing resentment. From the beginning of their marriage, Chris had lived extravagantly, but now, with finances stretched thin, her demands became impossible to meet. She wanted Ricky to be home more often, yet also expected him to somehow generate the same level of income they once had. Ricky found himself caught in an impossible tug-of-war. The only way he knew to support his family was to keep touring, but doing so only pushed his wife further away. He kept chasing a solution that didn't exist, while the cracks in their relationship grew wider. Alone at home, disillusioned with her life, and struggling with unmet expectations, Chris began drinking heavily. What started as a coping mechanism soon became a destructive force. Over time, Chris slipped into full-blown alcoholism, and her ability to care for their children diminished. She left the responsibility of parenting to their household staff while she numbed her reality with alcohol. At that point, the marriage was all but dead. In 1977, Ricky and Chris filed for divorce. But the legal papers didn't mean the emotional battle was over. Their bitter entanglement dragged on, leaving behind scars that even time struggled to heal. Divorce is never a pleasant thing, but divorce in the public eye must be so much worse. For Ricky and Chris, the tabloids were ruthless, plastering rumors and stories of the family's squabbles all over the headlines. That was not all. After he paid the lawyers and the split became official in 1982, Ricky was practically bankrupt. Perhaps this is what led him to some very questionable decisions. In 1980, Ricky's love life was in tatters, and his rebounds were even more ruinous. Ever the playboy, Ricky met the young Georgian crew while touring and ended up in bed with her. It came back to haunt him. Months later, Crew discovered she was pregnant. She tried to reconnect with Ricky to tell him the news, but the reaction was nothing short of appalling. Unfortunately, Crew never even got to see Ricky to tell him the news. One of his minders headed her off at the pass, sniping. Rick won't ever want to see that child. Countless of Crew's other attempts failed too, or so Ricky's story goes. And Crew had her son, Eric, in homage to his father, alone. But then she took matters into her own hands. When her son Eric was 6 months old, Crew carted the boy to one of Ricky's concerts. She then sat herself down right in the front row. According to her, the whole time he was performing, he was looking at Eric. She did not stop there. She started legal proceedings soon after. Once blood tests confirmed the boy was Ricky's, support payments quickly followed. But lest you wonder if this was all just a big mistake on Ricky's part, just wait. George and Crew's story of desperately trying to connect with an ignorant Ricky Nelson might be true. But there is another darker rumor about the night they met. That night, Crew had been with her sister, and one of Ricky's crew admitted that after sleeping with Georgianne, Ricky slipped out of bed to go romance her sibling. By now, Ricky was basically penniless. His career was in the gutter, and the stink of a messy public divorce still lingered. But then he met Helen Blair, a stunning model and exotic animal trainer in Las Vegas. It was a whirlwind romance, as was typical for Ricky. Within months, Blair was touring with him, and a short time later, she had moved into his house. Ricky seemed finally ready to settle down again, but old demons continued to haunt him. Blair quickly became the center of Ricky's life. Beyond being his lover, she became his personal assistant and fan club liaison. But for all this, Ricky's family interfered in his relationship again, claiming that Blair was not good enough for him. They were so insistent, Ricky even dropped plans of marrying her, in part to keep them off his back. In the end, it was all for nothing. Even as a washed-up star, Ricky could never truly forget or give up the luxuries of the high life. In fact, even though he was afraid of flying, he refused to travel with a tour bus for his 1985 tour. So, setting aside his fear, he forked out a ton of cash for his own private plane. Given his tight budget, it was second-hand, having once belonged to Jerry Lee Lewis. Like Ricky Nelson himself, the plane had seen better days and was riddled with mechanical problems. The purchase was a decision with dire consequences. Ricky Nelson's devastating death. Ricky's 1985 tour got off to a shaky start for Ricky and his band, mainly because Ricky's plane could never seem to work. It quickly turned terrifying. At one point, they could not get the engine to start and had to push the craft off the runway. At another, Ricky had to cancel one of his appearances because the plane was malfunctioning again. Still, Ricky kept pushing, kept touring, and kept trying to make more money. It would be his end. On New Year's Eve 1985, Ricky's careless purchase finally caught up with him. After taking off from Guntersville, Alabama, and intending to go to a New Year's party in Dallas, Texas, the crew experienced mechanical difficulties in the air, and after most probably catching fire, crash-landed just north of their destination. When the smoke cleared, the truth was almost unbearable. The teenage car crash that Ricky caused had nothing on this accident. Besides catching fire, the plane hit several trees on its way down, and the damage was brutal. Only 2 passengers, the pilot and co-pilot, survived. Ricky, his girlfriend Helen Blair, and all of his bandmates and crew perished, including former Steppenwolf band member Andy Chapin. The world's first teen idol died in the most tragic of circumstances, and there was a cruel twist. Ricky Nelson's family made their feelings toward Helen Blair painfully clear, even in death. When Blair's family requested that she be buried beside Ricky, his mother flatly refused. At the funeral, not a single person mentioned Helen's name. Though over 700 fans and multiple celebrity mourners were in attendance, Ricky's remains had been misdirected in transit from Texas to California, which delayed the service by several days. On January 6, 1986, 250 mourners filed into the Church of the Hills in Los Angeles, while hundreds of fans waited outside. Notable attendees included Colonel Tom Parker, Connie Stevens, Angie Dickinson, and dozens of actors, writers, and musicians. Ricky was later buried privately at Forest Lawn Cemetery. His ex-wife, Kristen Nelson, wasted no time trying to claim part of his legacy. She threatened to sue the family for Ricky's life insurance money and sought to take control of his estate from David Nelson, the administrator. The Los Angeles Superior Court ultimately rejected her bid. David ensured that Ricky's children with Kristen were financially taken care of. In the days after the funeral, rumors began to swirl. Some newspapers falsely claimed that freebasing cocaine might have caused the plane crash, but the National Transportation Safety Board firmly refuted those allegations after a thorough investigation. The world grieved Ricky Nelson's death for years. In 1987, he was posthumously inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It was a tribute not just to his trailblazing legacy, but to the life he lived, from radio and television to movies and music. Ricky Nelson was many things to many people, and that legacy continues to echo long after his final song. Were you a fan of the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click on the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.